But if you're looking at your OpEx and the company is saying, we're going to save 30% over the next 3 years in our OpEx, well, what does that mean from a people standpoint, capabilities? And then the how, right? Like, how are we going to do that? Maybe it's AI, right?
Welcome to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am your host, Trent Cotton. In this podcast, we will answer one big question. Is your HR organization future-proof? My guests are at the top of their field, and they'll be answering all of the questions that keep you up at night, including the future of work, how AI is going to impact our workforce, human capital, and of course, AI in HR. So whether you are an HR professional or a business leader, you're going to want to follow along and take a lot of notes. So with that, let's get into this episode and transform you into a human capitalist. Hello, and welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am Trent Cotton, your host, and if you have listened to any of the previous sessions, you know that I find most of my guests because I follow them on LinkedIn. And my guest today, Amit, is definitely one of those. So Amit, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Trent. I'm excited to be here.
Well, good. Well, I know you. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So Trent, similar to you, spent a lot of my early years in talent leadership roles, in-house talent, with the likes of IBM, and Deloitte, and most recently I was a global VP of talent for Unisys Corporation, where I had an amazing set of colleagues and teams who were in charge of helping attract talent as well as retain talent. And retention, as you know, that's across so many different channels inside the organization.
So where, I guess, can you talk a little bit more about what your current company does? Because you're the CEO.
Yeah. So I left the corporate in-house talent leadership roles because I saw this major gap in how organizations engage with not only candidates but also employees, and a lot of it has to do with the how things are communicated, be it strategy or internal mobility or just career management, leadership development. Like, there's so many avenues or ways to communicate with employees as well as the other stakeholders, such as investor relations, customers, even. And today, it all happens in siloed functions, right? So you've got content that the marketing department puts out. Sometimes the salespeople pick it up. Sometimes they're kind of on their own. Similarly, you've got investor relations sharing content, and because they're siloed in nature, the end audience, who are people at large, sometimes they can be your customers, sometimes they can be your employees, right?
Right.
There is a lot of inconsistencies in the messages that organizations put out, and a lot of it is not data driven. So that's the gap we're addressing at Clickify. Right now, we call it employer branding, but really our focus is to really get at that core of people get communicated with across the stakeholders organizations. So that's what Clickify is. I left my corporate job, built Clickify about 5 years ago, and just proud to be here. Super excited at our growth journey here.
That's interesting. And I know we're going to probably unpack that a little bit more later in the podcast, but the kind of the premise of this, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on and some of the other guests is I really see HR turning into more of human capital as it evolves, directly related with some of the stuff going on with AI. So if you had to look forward 1 or 5 years, what does the world of human capital and being a profession in that space look like, in your opinion?
Yeah. So, I mean, as you look at Trent, it's a great question. As you look at all of the what I call technological revolutions or evolutions over the years, it's got a lot of efficiencies built into it, right? So if you were to take a look at just email as an example, or even some of the tools that have been introduced to us like Workday or any of these HR systems, the whole premise is faster, better, cheaper, so that HR in particular can save time to do more human resources related activities. And what I mean by that is just really connecting, having more time to connect with the people at large, the scalability, of course, is always a struggle because, an HR to employee ratios keep increasing, right? So you've got like one HR person to at least, I mean, if you're in a large organization, you're looking at least 1,000 people to one HR.
Right. Right.
So as those ratios keep increasing, you could use technology to support like all the mundane tasks, right? And that's been happening for the last 20 years. Initially there was a push to do HR like shared services models, where the whole premise was still the same, which is, hey, we want the HR business partners or the centers of excellence to really focus on the more strategic elements, which is ultimately strategic means understanding the business, having more conversations with business leaders on the levers you drive using human capital, and leveraging human capital. And so I see that trend continuing, but accelerated or hyper accelerated with the advent of AI now, because the technology is so sophisticated, and it'll continue to get so sophisticated that it's going to leave us with a lot of time, actually, that we sorely need to really
Definitely.
organizations as an HR.
Yeah, because I think that when going through the history, definitely moving into the shared services, that was a step in the right direction. It was getting HR people to get out of the ivory tower into the business that they were actually supposed to support, but they didn't fix all of the workload that went with traditional HR. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I think 2025 is going to be tiptoeing into it a little bit. I really think blaring and going is going to be 2026. And if we were to have this conversation in 2 years, human capital will not look like what it does today. And I am
Yeah.
here for it. Are there?
Yeah. I think, to your point, Trent, right? I do think there's a huge opportunity with leadership, right? So people
Mhm,
leaders in organizations. So when I think about HR as a function, right, you've got the employees, you've got the company, and then
mhm.
you've got people leaders, right? So that's an HR kind of orchestrates all three of those legs of a stool, if you will. So as I see the people leaders, their role is also going to evolve with the advent of AI and the technologies that we, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity for HR to help people leaders develop the people capabilities, people leadership capabilities, uh, where right now they might be, focused on tasks like, scheduling interviews or providing interview feedback as an example, or, you know, figuring out what kind of succession plans they need to be putting together. Like all of that, the mundane stuff that's associated with the actual mechanics of making that happen can be semi-automated, so
Right.
that leaders are actually focused on building people capabilities that they need to be.
Awesome. Um, so let's shift to employer branding, but I do have one question that I don't know if it's a good segue or not. But if I'm listening to this and I go, okay, wow, so he spent most of his career in TA, kind of on the HR on the corporate side, and then now you kind of glazed over 5 years later I'm running this company that I started. What made you make that jump? Because that's a risky jump for a lot of people.
It is. It certainly was. For me, so and I got to credit my first employer, IBM. Just fond memories, and so I'm a former IBM. We're always thinking about solving major problems that organizations have, and I saw this huge opportunity in the marketplace. That, to be honest, some of the more traditional HR tech companies out there, they're not addressing this, right?
Mhm.
Um, Microsoft gets close, but Microsoft is a productivity play, right?
Right.
Uh, when I say Microsoft, I mean Microsoft Office as a platform. And so it's a massive opportunity that uh, I gave myself 3 years, and I said, if I don't hit a certain growth number in 3 years, I might consider going back. Uh, but here we are, 5 years later. The company continues to grow at averaging 200% year over year.
Wow.
So we're on to something, right? In
Yeah.
terms of problems we're solving for major organizations. And so here I am, and luckily I want to thank my wife to allow me to do this. That goes a long way as well. So if I didn't have the support, I'd probably still be in my current role.
What's a big lesson that you learned as you look over the last 5 years? The thing that has changed the most and impacted you the most. What would that be?
Yeah, I think I underestimated um, how how long it takes to change mindsets of people, right,
Hmm.
and organizations, right. So we're constantly trained, even as HR leaders, to approach certain things from a process standpoint or a system standpoint a certain way. So I'll give you a perfect example. From a talent attraction standpoint, 80% of budgets are spent on job boards, right? Uh, and
No
there's
way.
nothing with job boards, but there's a lot of opportunity that gets missed because it's all job related, right? You look at applicant tracking systems today, HR systems like Workday, they're all built with the architecture of jobs, right?
Hmm.
From an attraction standpoint. Well, uh, when you look at, like, I have a 13-year-old, right? Like, when you look at the next gen talent, they're actually not, I mean, yes, do they care about what kind of work they're going to do? Absolutely. But equally, what they care about is what kind of impact they're going to have, what kind of organization they want to work for, right? And that's the mind shift that I think has been the most challenging to really be out there in the marketplace to enable uh, HR and TA leaders, or we're very, and I've been there, right? So
Right.
you've got 50 or 100 recs that you have to fill this month, so it becomes it's like a machine, right?
Hmm.
So how do you kind of really elevate from the machine mentality and say, okay, what is actually going to drive quality talent versus quantity? And that's where, of course, Clickify plays such a vital role in helping craft the stories. I just read an article, Trent, and sorry if I'm like gone in different directions,
No, I love it.
but I just read an article where you've got AI bots, right, on the
Hmm.
employer side, trying to find candidates, and then you've got bots on the candidate side where they're just literally just funneling in like hundreds of applications in literally minutes, right? So your systems are flooded on one side, and then you've got the filtering happening on the other side. Yet, 70% of organizations you speak with today have a talent problem, right? In terms of
Right.
attracting the right kind of talent. So there's a mismatch there that will continue to happen, and I think it's only going to get worse with AI, actually, on both sides of the equation. And I wholeheartedly, I believe that employer branding and the stories you tell is going to be the differentiator in terms of the type of talent organizations are going to attract.
I I I respect that perspective, and I don't know. Do you know Serge Boudreau? Um, he, he and I spent a lot of time. I was on his
Surge.
podcast.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I love
Serge.
Surge. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
if you want to really, if that whole easy apply and all that topic is something that's good, there's a podcast that he and I really just kind of hashed it out. It is a problem, and I like how he frames it. He said that easy apply was built with the intent to solve a problem, but it has actually created more problems, and it's frustrating. My husband's been in the market, and there he goes, like, he'll show me the job description and he'll show me his resume. He goes, you spent time in recruiting. Like, I fit this to a T, but I gotta does not qualify. And I was like, honey, let me pull the curtain back for you. there's a
That's right.
there's a bot back there that you may have misspelled one thing and now you're disqualified. So I do agree
Yeah.
with you. I think that employer branding stint is going to definitely be the differentiator. And I see it. My daughter's 21.
Hmm.
And in civil engineering, graduates in May. And she looks at the type of projects that the firms work on. It's not necessarily which one pays better, which one has more notoriety. It is definitely about the impact of work. So, how do you define employer branding, and how have you seen it change in the last 5 years?
Yeah, great question. So look, employer branding. I mean, if you ask the chief people officer, they'll get it, right? It's two sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
is talent attraction and talent retention, right? And it just continues, right? It's a continual listening to employees. It's activating and continual measurement of your brand and how it's being perceived. And perception is reality, as we know, in many cases, right? So, the way we think about employer branding is it's 50-50. 50% of employer branding helps you attract talent,
Mm-hmm.
external talent. And then the other 50 is about how do you make sure that you leverage your brand in the most realistic way possible, right? Because you don't want to be putting just shiny things out there and,
Right.
not everything is rosy, but in a very realistic way. How do you engage with the talent and help them understand the why behind, decisions that are made at an organization, right? Like, or why was 2024 so successful? Like, do they actually
Mm-hmm.
understand that beyond an email that a CEO sends? So really getting at the heart of helping employees understand the why. So the way we think about employer branding is both sides of the coin, and there's internal communications that is squarely in the middle of employer
Right.
branding, and oftentimes it's totally separate function in an organization that doesn't sit inside employer branding or doesn't connect with employer branding in any way. There's a huge opportunity there as well.
Yeah, I think, and you and I were talking prior to the recording being hit, that I think with employer branding, so many people think that it stops once the person says, I do. And it's a lot like a marriage.
Mhm.
I dated my husband before and I still date him even after we're married because, there's this, you still need to have that connection, and I think that employers are missing out on that part of it. And you bring up something that is a pretty hot topic, or at least it is for me. But, employer branding, sometimes it's a little bit of a gray area because sometimes it sits in communication, sometimes it sits in marketing, sometimes it reports directly into HR but has a dotted line. Um, do you have an opinion on where exactly it should sit to make it the
Yeah.
most efficient?
Yeah. I'm smiling because, there's so many practitioners I speak with on a daily basis, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a view out there that's like, it doesn't matter where it sits. I happen to disagree with that view.
Yeah.
Um, I think employer branding squarely sits in the HR function, right? Not even talent acquisition, right? I actually think it sits with the chief people officer because you've got talent attraction, talent management. Unless, of course, I'm seeing a lot of companies now combine that role, the talent acquisition and or
Mm-hmm.
with. So I'm thinking employer branding sits squarely in that world, and the why behind that, right, is very simple, to be honest, right? Because there's so much data
Yeah.
that HR organizations have that marketing just simply doesn't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
From an employee standpoint and from a candidate standpoint. Um, Similarly, the internal comms department, generally, sometimes it sits in the HR function and sometimes it sits in marketing, right? So there's always like a gray area. I think there's so much value to be unlocked if the employer branding and the internal comms function sit inside the HR function. Uh, and a lot of it purely has to do with the amount of data and the analytics that the HR function has on people. Um, I think there's a huge opportunity there. In fact, we collect so much data at Clickify. Right?
Really? Like,
It's really interesting insights on what part of your value proposition actually is engaging with not only candidates.
yeah, we're going to unpack that because, I love data. It's interesting. I think, I've seen it working in two different ways. The most successful was at a previous organization, it was an international bank. And we had one of the department heads was the head of internal communication and employer branding sat in his organization with a dotted line over into marketing. So she was part of the marketing's daily stand up. So that way she knew what was going on. If there was any kind of changes in brand or tone or voice, marketing was aware of what we were going to be posting. And then any kind of internal communication, reorganization, change of benefits, change of direction, anything that went out to investor relations, they kind of put an employee stint on it. And I mean, I worked there for 11 years. I kind of got to where I took it for granted. And now that I'm back in the jungle, it's like, God, we were really onto something, with everybody. So kudos to Rosalind Houston. She was ahead of her time, but, that was definitely something that worked. So you trickled with data. My minor was statistics and finance. I was a banker before I got into HR. So I love
Love
data.
it.
What are some of the data things that you find, or the data trends that you find that are the most interesting about what you will pull out of your product?
Yeah. So just to be clear, we're not like a workforce intelligence platform, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there are amazing platforms out there. But what we do really well is we've collected. So I just did this because we had the 2024 in review kind of analysis of Clickify, and
Mm-hmm.
got about 11,000 stories that have been told using the platform over the last 4 years, right? So we've been in business since 2020. And we have 11,000, I would like to think, is sort of big data. I don't know. Big data is like subjective in terms of how much data,
Mm-hmm.
results in big data, right? Uh, for us, I think 11,000 is enough data points to start to deduct some interesting findings. And so what we're finding is the number one across all of our clients. And by the way, a lot of my clients don't have this yet, meaning we do provide benchmarks, but we're working on a dashboard where we'll actually provide that to everybody. But we found is employee celebrations actually are the number one driver of candidate conversion.
What do you mean?
So picture, and these are live examples of Clickify. So you have employees who come into Clickify who are celebrating their promotion, or
Okay.
they're celebrating a learning certificate that they just received from their employer. And they're publicly celebrating it using Clickify internally as well as externally on their social feeds, right? And the CTA, or the call to action for anybody who's interacting with that content or that piece of content, is driven to jobs,
Wow.
right? So we're really shifting this paradigm of storytelling, right? So, or to my earlier comment, we're so trained to just say, "Oh, I've got this job. I got to put this in front of the right people," right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
really how job boards are so successful. What we're saying is, what if, just what if you started telling stories that actually have nothing to do with the job? The job will come later. It's almost like a sales funnel, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if you got the right people to actually go down that funnel before you even shared the job with them? And that's what I mean by kind of the big data is we're starting to now unpack and provide the level of intelligence back to talent leaders and to employer branding leaders to say, hey, if you shared this type of content that is really associated with your value proposition, you have X% higher probability of converting high quality candidates.
Wow. So, okay, that was a little bit of a mind ninja. I didn't even think about that. That makes so much sense, because we're always trying to get, our top performers in the organization. Hey, who else do you know? I mean, this is just an easier way to do it at scale.
Oh yeah, it's not your traditional, referral platform or
Right. Right.
referral process. It's very subtle. It's very organic. It's very real, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the referral processes are built around jobs as well, right?
Yeah.
So you have a job, you want to refer somebody. Well, we want to say, let's elevate the conversation if you really want to get a quality talent. And that conversation happens through your people. And then it's people who trust other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we call it kind of activating your network through content.
Yeah, and the story piece is huge. As you were telling that, I was thinking of how much I have bought from the TikTok shop this year. Because people that I watch are, you're like, hey, I tried this and here's how it worked. I'm like, well,
That's right.
hell, sign me
That's
up,
right.
you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And to that point, right, I have a 13-year-old who I love.
mm-hmm.
And and I'm looking at his behavior all the time, and his friends, by the way, who are
Mm-hmm.
just hanging out here today. And when you look at their behavior, I mean, they're going to be in the job market, probably in the next like 3 years, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you're 16 and you can actually work at like Taco Bell or whatever, right?
Right.
And as I think about them and their behavior, they're not going to job boards. They're going to find their next opportunity on TikTok,
Mm.
on on
YouTube.
YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
right? There. So as I think about that, it is absolutely critical for these companies to start now, because as you know, it takes at least 4 to 5 years to actually build a brand with the talent you want to attract in the future. Right?
Well, and I think you know, brands are missing out on. So let's pick on YouTube as an example. Second largest search engine in the world. Um, if you have any kind of a question, if I need to fix something, the first thing I'm going to go do is look at YouTube. Or if I want to learn how to create a custom GPT, I'm going to go to YouTube. If I want to work for ABC company, what if I go to YouTube and the first thing I see are its employees talking about, hey, this is what I learned. I started here and I ended up here in only this many years. Like, and then the algorithm is
Powerful.
just playing. I mean, to me, it's
Powerful.
just, yeah, it's a
It's
no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. We did, again, at the bank, we did a day in the life of video job description for our retail side, so the high volume side. And I had to push, oh my God, it was, I want to say 2015, 2016. So before YouTube was like, very business is kind of, businesses, I think, were still a little skeptical about it. And I said, look, if we play this right, anytime someone types in teller at X Bank, that video is going to come to the top of the search results.
Mhm.
And I said, it'll take probably 2 years, but we'll be able to do it. We did it in 6 months. It was
Wow.
unreal because I didn't think about it that we embedded the job description video
Inside
in
the
the job description. So every time they clicked on it to watch it, it was just,
right,
adding
right.
adding ranks. So
Yeah.
I love that idea about getting your employees to kind of tell the story. And do you find that people interact more with the content from your platform because it is storytelling?
Yeah. Well, it's a couple of factors, right? We see roughly 8x more engagement with the same content. So it's A/B testing, right?
Okay.
If you have an employee story of let's say it's actually employee generated, because we support that. It's branded.
Mm-hmm.
It's on brand. So let's say it's an employee story of just celebrating their most recent promotion. I mean, it could be as
Mm-hmm.
simple as that, right? Take the same video, and if it's shared through the employee base on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, it drives 8x more traffic and candidates than any paid ad out there.
Wow.
Same content, right? So we are seeing this behavior, which is people, as you said, Trent, believing in people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be the same video, but if I shared it on my company's feed versus my employee's feed, it's 8x more engaging and convert.
Fascinating. And then for, I think I saw in one of your annual studies on what talent and employer branding leaders are prioritizing in 2025 in terms of budget. What are some of the trends that you thought were really eye-opening?
Yeah. The one that I was very happy to see.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and by the way, shout out to Top Employers Institute, who we partnered with for that study. There's some really amazing stats as well.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in the description so anybody can go and check it out. It's pretty interesting.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Trent.
Mm-hmm.
So we do this study every year. Uh, we've been doing it for the last 3 years, and we're not stopping anytime soon.
Good, because
So
I
this
love
is
the
about
data.
50. Yeah. So we actually hand select and we reach out to about 50 or so organizations, employer branding leaders, talent leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. About 70% of the respondents have over 10,000 employees. So it's fairly comprehensive in terms of the volume of and the extent to which employer branding is being done organizations around the world. These are global organizations. We get regional cuts as well. And I actually am always looking forward to what comes back, because I personally read through every comment around the priorities
Uh-huh.
of leaders and branding leaders. And I actually help summarize it as well. So even though I have an amazing team, I just like to get my hands dirty and really understand what's happening in the marketplace. The one and only thing, to be honest, that I'm super excited about and was excited to see was how employer branding leaders are actually getting more aligned with the workforce planning function within their companies.
Unpack that.
So, workforce planning, as you know, Trent, has been around for years.
Mhm.
Some organizations do it better than others. But it's really, if I just summarize the workforce planning function, the way I kind of remember growing up in corporate America, is really understanding the capabilities, the people capabilities that you need now and
Mhm.
into 3 to 5 years out. And it's completely aligned with the business strategy process within organizations. And when you look at the people capabilities, so the output of a workforce planning function, I'm grossly simplifying it,
Mhm.
but really the output is, what kind of people capabilities do I need now to be successful over the next, let's say 1 year, right? And then where do I see my organization headed, 3 to 5 years down the road? And that's what gets shared with the shareholders and investors, or the board as well as and so that board level strategy then takes shape in terms of capabilities, skills, location strategy, right? M&A, right? Like, are we going to
Yeah.
acquire?
Mhm.
So there are all kinds of attributes of a workforce planning function. What I was super excited to see is there is so much data, back to your point, Trent, with data, there's so much data that workforce planning functions have today that is like a gold mine for an employer branding leader or even a talent leader, where, you can kind of rise up from the number of recs that are open today,
Yeah.
really start to think about, and it's hard to do. I get it. Look, I've been there. It's
Mhm.
living in the day. You got to, fill these recs, right? But at some point, you've got to rise up and start to look at like the big picture, right? The forest, and say, okay, if the company is headed in this direction where we're going to be, since everything is AI these days, I wanted to use that as an example. Let's say the company wants to save 30% of their OpEx, and you keep me honest, Trent, with your financial background. But if you're looking at your OpEx and the company is saying, we're going to save 30% over the next 3 years in our OpEx, well, what does that mean from a people standpoint, the
Mhm.
capabilities? And then the how, right? Like, how are we going to do that? Maybe it's AI, right? And through the use of AI, we're going to do this. Well, do we have enough AI capabilities? What is our stance on AI,
Do
right?
we have the infrastructure?
If we have the infrastructure, like all of that, right? And it has a direct impact to your hiring process and your
Mhm.
retention process, right? And so just getting more aligned with that. And I was so happy to see this in one of the priorities, like summarized, right? And not everybody's doing this, by the way. So there are about 10% of the respondents are actually getting aligned with their workforce planning.
Wow. It's interesting. I think workforce planning is going to change a lot, because we're already seeing some organizations that there was, like in normal times, let's just say 5 years ago, they would have probably 5 times the number of open roles. But I think that all of the companies are taking that step back, to your point, and going, how can we do things more efficiently with the staff that we already have?
Mm-hmm.
And I read something, I don't know if you saw it, about Klarna. The CEO came out. I think he got
Yeah.
a little ahead of his skis, because I think internal comm tried to pull it back a little bit and said, oh, he was speaking generally. But I think generally what he was saying is that, they really haven't hired anyone in the last 1 or 2 years compared to what they did the 2 years before, because they're looking at every FTE and saying, how can we make them and scale them with AI? Do
Mm-hmm.
you think that's going to be the norm in 25 and 26? Not necessarily like
Yeah.
using AI to get rid of people, but how do we do more with
Yeah.
less?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have the boards. I mean, everything I'm reading these days, certainly AI is here. It's here to stay.
Mm,
Um, I'm certainly reading that, this whole skill-based hiring. I mean, you and I, Trent, we've been reading that for the last 20 years.
yeah,
Um, I think the skill-based hiring and retention is going to be center stage again. Um, I think the issue though with skill-based hiring is, just taking stock of what people have is so hard to get. I
it
mean,
really is.
and it's not a list of skills, actually, believe it or not, right? It's you're bigger than your skill, right? Like you've got all kinds of motivations of why you stay at a company, and because skills are the easiest to measure, that's why we kind of focus on it. Um, but I do think it's almost a landmine, so watch out for talent leaders for
Yeah,
looking at skill based hiring and retention. Take it with a grain of salt. When I say that, because it's all dependent on the inputs of the individual. Because ultimately, you're asking the individual what you're skilled at.
right.
Uh,
So you have
and,
that whole Johari window effect.
right. And by the way, LinkedIn does this. There is no other easy way to do that, right? I mean, you
Mm-mm.
have to ask people. I do think, I see a world where organizations will take what's happening with AI and start to really understand capabilities versus skills.
Mhm.
So they might say, you know what, like I've got or adjacent capabilities. So they might say, I've got a field service technician, right? They're using XYZ tools today to do their job. With AI, they might use, ABC tool.
Yeah.
So how difficult is it going to be for my field service technicians to go from this tool set they're using to AI generated or AI powered tool set? And I think that's the delta that organizations need to kind of look at and say, you know what, yeah, this is too much of a gap. So we've got to either fund more L&D or learning and development activities, or we
Mhm.
might have to acquire capabilities, right? So there are all kinds of. That's the workforce planning function that excites me the most.
Yeah, I think you are 100% on, because if I had to look at my 2025 plan as an HR leader, it is consumed with upskilling our employee base. We're a data and AI company, so we largely software development up until last year when we made the pivot, and now it's like, hey, we got great software developers, and they're very data mindset, but early 2025, I'm sitting down with our CTO, head of engineering, and CEO and saying, okay, if we keep this revenue track, if we hit revenue in 2026 of X amount and 80% of that is data and AI, that's our framework. Now let's
Mm-hmm.
back into it. Do we have the people today that'll get us there in 2 years? Or do we
That's
need to
right.
hire? Do we need to develop? And, it's, to me, it's exciting because it's not the same old. I mean, you and I both have been in these high churn shops, not necessarily like high volume, but just like crap. Didn't I just fill one of these 2 weeks ago?
Right, right.
Um, and a lot of times organizations, when they were sitting down and doing the workforce planning, especially on the revenue side, we have to grow by X percent of revenue. That equals X number of heads. Let's hire those heads. There was never a conversation of how do we upskill and reskill the base that we have. So for all the work and the trauma that the AI topic has caused in the workforce, I do think, to your point, there's going to be a lot of opportunities as a result of AI. I mean, would you agree with that? Or am
Oh,
I just
absolutely.
being optimistic?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's I actually wrote a piece on Forbes on this, which is like, and this is in 2020s when I wrote it. Um, and actually it was really the future of work in the age of AI was the topic, the title. And, I kind of view AI as just any other technological revolution that has happened. You look at the internet, you look at automation, it's just much faster and much more sophisticated now, right?
Hmm.
So, um, and every turn, the tech turn that has happened in the last 50 years, people have come out kind of better off, right? And not in terms of like, I do think if you look at the number of jobs that have been created, I actually think there's been more jobs created with technology than less, right? So if you look at the
Right.
net, there's been a job growth over the last 50 years, right? I think similarly with AI as well, where you'll actually have, I think, more gratification with your jobs now with
Mhm.
AI than you probably did pre-AI. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, you look at a call center rep, right? Initially before AI, they might be fielding 80% of questions, right? And now you have bots and so on as well, right?
Mhm.
So, you've got kind of that transactional stuff that is more and more sophisticated with AI that can be handled. So now the rep can actually do more high quality work and actually be more purpose driven as well, where they're like, you know what? I actually want to get to know this customer.
Right.
So instead of just focused on like the metrics, like how long were they on the call, or I'm sure the CSRs have very specific metrics that they're so transactional in nature.
Mhm.
None of that will matter anymore, right? What will matter is, are these reps actually building a relationship with people or their customers? And what
Mhm.
does that do, right? What does that do to the customer? The customer also is happier, right? So I view this as like a huge tectonic shift that's happening not only in the way we do work, how we feel about work, but also how customers actually are the winners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you think about how many times you've called into a call center and they go, okay, well, let me transfer you to someone else. And then you tell the same story over and over and over. And I know I am guilty of this sin, but by the time I get transferred for the third time, I don't care how nice that person is, they're getting it. And I'm
Right.
just thinking that AI can actually, because I use the upgraded Gemini in my personal Gmail, and there was this long chain of email responses. One of the hate that damn reply all. Um, but I was able to go in and say, Gemini, what did I miss?
Hmm.
Carrie said this, Katie said this, John suggested this. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't have to read the 26 emails before it. So
Right.
I'm thinking like the handoff of the client going from one department to the next, that AI can track that whole conversation. And whenever I
Mhm.
pick up and I go, hey, hang on just one second, all right, my assistant tells me that this is what you spoke with last. Is this right? Are we on track? So I'm excited about that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah, and I gotta say, like, I'm a huge Capital One fan. I'll
oh, I
have
am too. I've watched them for years, for
right.
years.
And I just love like that model. I know we're stuck on kind of customer service right now, so I'll stick to that vein. But man, like when I call them, I actually feel like they know me,
Hmm.
right? And they're super. So they're doing something right, right? Like, sure, it'll only get better with AI. Where if it's stuff like, hey, I don't recognize this charge, yeah, I can't handle that all day, right?
Hmm.
But if I'm dealing with like, hey, I'm about to go on international travel and I don't feel comfortable, with whatever the case may be, from Turkey or whatever, right? Um, Getting to that kind of conversation with Capital One, a CSR, is a whole different level.
Yeah.
And like figuring out what my charge is about.
Yeah. Of course, being in banking, that was my world for so long, but I was amazed whenever they were able to snag, can see his face, because I always liked his shoes. Every time he presented, I loved the shoes that he wore. But he came from Google, so
Right?
whenever the announcement came, I'm like, what the hell? Like, somebody from Google going to he was in charge of innovation, I think, over there. And then to watch that Capital One culture turn from the inside out, it has been absolutely fascinating to watch. And I love how they are leveraging AI, not just with their clients, they're also doing it a lot with their employees, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Full disclaimer: they're not a client of ours. I just happen to love
Same
the
thing.
customer service.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a crush on them because I think they're doing something different. They're one of the few in that sector that I'll watch outside of some fintech startups.
Mm. Yeah.
All right, so you ready for some rapid fire? Because I feel like I could pick your brain on AI for another hour on this stuff. I love this stuff. So, what is a book that changed your perspective on business?
Mm. There are a couple actually. So on the business side, there's
Hmm.
a book called Stick With It. Um,
Is that by the Heath brothers?
yeah, I think so. Pretty
Yeah,
sure it is.
they wrote Switch too, which is one of my
Yeah, I got to
favorites.
look at my case here. I mean, I read it like
Has it got
almost
duct
10.
tape on it?
Yeah. I
That's
think
it. Yeah,
Stick
yeah,
With
yeah,
It.
yeah, yeah.
Amazing. And the same kind of brothers, Moments That Matter is the other one that I
Hmm.
love.
Hmm.
But Stick With It, this certainly has been very important to me in my journey currently, right? Like,
Right.
it's a startup, you're going to have ups and downs. How do you just kind of stick with it to stick with it long enough where you're actually going to see the hockey stick uh, in a SaaS company, right?
Hmm.
Then Moments That Matter is just a phenomenal book. Uh, yeah, and it kind of aligns with everything we've been talking about today. Is you've got to really start thinking beyond the transaction, right? And it really start to understand the journey, not only of your customers but also your people. And story about celebrations. Those are important moments for an employee, right?
Hmm.
People always talk about why advocacy programs fail. Well, because you're shoving down like some corporate content through your people. It's never
Yeah.
gonna, right?
Hmm.
If you want true advocacy, you got to get people to really be in it and believe that corporation is doing something nice for me, right? For once.
Well,
Um,
no one can tell the corporate story like the people who are in the corporate,
that's
you
right.
know, and I think we
And
miss
it's
that.
it's the what's in it for me, right? So a lot of these
Hmm.
advocacy platforms, and how advocacy platforms are built around, hey, I've got this nice, pretty templatized content. All I'm doing is just getting my employees to just hit the share button.
Hmm.
Uh, that is not advocacy. Uh, that's like that's actually anti-advocacy, right?
It really is.
Uh,
Yeah.
and that's why these advocacy programs fail. I think you got it to your point. Just really help your employees say, okay, you know what? Like imagine, and this is what happens in Clickify today. They come into the platform, or even they don't even have to be in the platform. They just get notified because we're integrated with Microsoft. They come in and look. It's like, oh, do you want to celebrate? Like, hey, you had Thanksgiving, right? I'm speaking U.S. now.
Hmm.
Hey, over the Thanksgiving holiday, do you want to share like special moments with your family?
Oh, so
Here,
it nudges them.
here's where you can do it. And then
Hmm.
it goes back. There's of course, because it's a corporation, there's approval flows and such. But the half the battle is capturing these moments that actually matter to people.
And it's funny that you picked two of the Heath brother books. The other one that you really ought to check out is Switch. It talks about change management. But it
Yes,
just for the audience, if you've never read anything by I think it's Chip or Dan Heath, it's funny to me that you pick those books because the reason I like them is because they tell stories,
that's right.
right?
They do. They do.
Yeah, they do. So like one of the things in Switch is it talks about change management, and they give this metaphor of an elephant rider and an elephant in the path, and I'm not going to spoil the book, but one's logic, one's emotion, and one is what you're trying to get through change. And I can just about, I know I can remember four of the stories that they told to teach the principle right off the top of my head, and I read it in 2010. Like I can almost verbatim. So if you
Uh,
like stories that
eh,
teach great lessons, any of the Heath brothers, I read the two that you suggested. They're great. My favorite is Switch, but I love all of those. So do you have I mean, you're a CEO, you've got a family, you got a teenager. Do you have time for a podcast or series? And if so, which one would you recommend?
oh boy, of course yours, Trent. Haven't
Oh, you're
haven't been
too
here.
kind.
So, um, yeah, I just actually started on the podcast journey on Apple, and there's one I'm going through right now. It is enterprise. It's really focused on enterprise growth and sales.
Okay.
Um, what do enterprises? And I to be honest, it just pops up anytime I am in my car, right? So I have no idea what it's called. It's just there. Um, but
AI at its best, right?
related to enterprise transformation and what are
Hmm.
dealing with, and then where does software and technology, let alone AI, but just technology at large, what part do they play in the transformation of internet?
Okay. Awesome.
I should, you know what, for I might email you.
Yeah, send it over to me, and I'll put it in the show notes in the description so people can check it out. And I'm also I had an idea over the weekend. I've gotten so many phenomenal recommendations on books and podcasts. I think I'm going to do a running list and share it at the end of the year and say, here's all the brain trust that I have had as guests. Here's what they recommend that you sink your teeth into. So I'll definitely get that and put it out there. But where can people find and engage with you?
Oh, of course, LinkedIn. You can go on our website as well. There's actually, we have our own podcast website as well.
Yeah, I saw you had Brian Fink on there.
That's right. He's awesome.
Fink. Yeah.
Yes, you gotta love him.
Yeah, he's got, I tell him all the time, I was like, if you find a way to package the energy that you have, I want to be the first one that gets a subscription. He's, and he's even more in real life. I mean, he is just larger than life. He's just
an amazing
guy.
Human being, similar to you, Trent. I know we're just starting to get to know each other. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
no, thank you. Yeah. So, and just for the audience, like I said, I found Amit because of some of the content. I think someone in my network liked something that you posted, and then I went on a rabbit trail. So definitely fantastic content, both by you and by Clickify. I love data, so I love some of the perspective that you all are putting out there. So please keep it up. So if you had to do a mic drop moment, something that the listener would go, oh, that was from the podcast that he was on, what would be your mic drop moment?
Yeah, I would say, look, stop everything you're working on in 2025 and just rise above a little bit, right? Beyond the day to day and ask the right questions, right? Like, why are we doing this? Right.
I ask myself that every 5 minutes sometimes. I'm like, why am I doing this?
Yeah. And then ask yourself that first before you just go out to your leader and so on, right? Because it could be a little dangerous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But just ask yourself this, right? Like, and just say, then what, I'm looking at my 2025 plans. Here's what my leader tells me I got to do. Here's what I think we should be doing. And just have that conversation, right? Like, just think outside the box, which I know many of you do. I'm sure a lot of your listeners do. And I do think if you stop every now and then, I think you'll be surprised at kind of how much impact you can have as an individual.
I love that. And for anyone out there that has that bug, that itch, every founder I've ever met, they always describe it as an itch to start something on their own. What is one piece of advice you have for someone that is contemplating?
Yeah. I will say, looking back, do your research, like really understand if it's a problem or if it's a problem that you and like two other people had, right?
Yeah.
So if you're contemplating, and it could be, I mean, if you're tech, you're always trying to solve a problem. If you're a consulting service, you're also solving a problem, right? So it could be services or tech, but definitely do your research on what are the exact pain points so that your ultimate clients have, and maybe their clients, in our case, is the candidates, right?
Right.
And employees. But I would say definitely like ask like, the same question 5 different ways, 500 people at least, right? Before this is a real problem. Yeah. And I think if you really understand the problem, the solutioning becomes like 10 times easier.
Well, it's, I wish I could take credit for the quote, but it's from Agile. It's fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Absolutely.
I love that advice. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned so much, and now I'm going to get even more into some of the data that you all put out there. So some of the perspectives you have me scratching my head a little bit, wondering what I need to be doing differently in 2025. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that is a wrap on another episode of The Human Capitalist. Thank you so much for choosing to tune in and invest your time with me today. I hope that you walked away with some valuable insights and actionable strategies that you can maximize your greatest asset, and that's you. But hey, before you go, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that way you can stay in the know. The Human Capitalist movement begins with you. If you have some feedback, Feel free to leave it. I'll read every comment. I want to make sure that the content that I am delivering is what you want to hear. If you want to connect further, you can find me at my link down below. I'd love to hear from you and continue this awesome conversation. Well, this is Trent Cotton, your human capitalist, and I'm going to sign off. But remember, invest in yourself, own your potential, and keep building your human capital.